It's a true pleasure to be here, and I'm honored to be invited, but also because I can talk about the thing that I'm most passionate about, which is design and emotion. So I'm going to start with an example. And I like this example because it kind of summarizes the essence of the talk that I will be giving. And it's a design that was made by one of my students, a design for a wheelchair, a design of a wheelchair for children. And the student said, I want to redesign the wheelchair with the focus on the emotions of the children who are using it. So these are wheelchairs which are actually quite similar to the wheelchairs that grown-ups use. They're just smaller. Sometimes they're in a bright color. So she measured the emotions that children have towards these wheelchairs. And one of the emotions that she found is shame, which is, of course, highly unwanted. I mean, you don't want children to feel ashamed of their own wheelchair. What we were surprised to find is that the reason why these children are ashamed is these handles. So they're not ashamed of being in a wheelchair. For them, it's just a tool, it's neutral. But they're ashamed of these handles. And why are they ashamed of these handles? It's because they literally turn this wheelchair into a pushchair. They express, I am dependent of someone else to push me around. The handles express dependency. So that is a real kind of emotional signifier, turning this wheelchair into a pushchair. And that then resonates in a negative way with the fundamental need of autonomy. So it harms the need for autonomy, which is the need to be able to, freely expressive of who you are and make your own decisions. It's sitting in a chair with these handles on it. So here you can see the redesign. And of course, it changed in many different ways. But one of the things that Eva did is she took off the handles and she replaced it by a bar. And the bar can be slid up, but it can also be slid down when the children are being independent. So then it's unrecognizable as a push bar. And it did have quite a profound impact on the emotion. So no longer shame, but pride. So as you can see, one of the things that we like to do, and I'm from Delft University, and we say, to know is to measure, or to measure is to know, is that I like to measure emotions as a starting point for design. And there are many ways you can measure emotions. I mean, you can use physiological instruments, but I really love to rely on self-report. Basically just asking people, what is it that you feel? And people are pretty good in expressing what they feel when they are using or when they are looking at a product design. What they do find difficult often is to find the words for that. Like, I know what I feel, but how do I put that into words? That's why we often use simple tools like this. I mean, this was my PhD work. It's like almost 20 years ago. And it's emotionally expressive characters. And what you do is you ask a person, pick the character that best expresses what you feel, and then you have a starting point for a conversation. So this is called Primo, and we have 7 positive, 7 negative emotions. It's quite a simple tool. I mean, it's freely available, but it can work really well in having a meaningful conversation about emotional experiences in relation to design. And I'd like to show you something
I chciałbym pokazać.
we loved and relied on measuring emotions. And we did work a lot with industry. So this was a collaboration with Dior, and this was focused on the fine fragrance J'adore. And we measured, using these characters, we measured the emotions that people experience when looking at the package, when looking at the advertisement, and actually also when smelling the fragrance. And in the chart, you can see how these emotions differ across the manifestations of the product. And this can be useful when you try to create something which is emotionally consistent. You could say, okay, we need to change the package because it needs to align more with the emotion of the fragrance. Or here's another example of an industry collaboration. This was Nestle, and it was for their waters. And so they wanted to create a water bottle that evokes a positive emotion. But before they did that, they wanted to know, what is the kind of the emotional landscape of water bottles? So what are the emotions that people typically have towards small size water bottles? So we did a study in which we measured the emotions evoked by these water bottles. Some of them are real, some of them were prototypes just generated for the study. And then you could do a multidimensional analysis, scaling analysis. So an analysis that takes the data and transforms it into a map. And here you can see the map, and you could see that the emotions kind of cluster together, especially the negative emotions, which means that people often, when they felt, for example, disgusted, they also felt unpleasantly surprised. And you can see some of these packages really are on the negative side. But what we thought was interesting is that on the positive side, you could actually see two kind of clusters. One with emotions like pleasant surprise, fascination, and we call that the wow experience. And one with emotions like confidence and satisfaction, and we call that the tranquility domain. So the next step was, okay, can you design water bottles for both of these domains to really kind of emphasize on these positive experiences? So we did what designers do. We started sketching both for the wow experience and the tranquility experience. And I cannot really show the end result, but these are some of the concepts that we generated, really trying to can focus on the essence of that particular experience. So this was for tranquility. And this is really about ease of use, about the comfort, about the safety of not having to worry that it will leak in your bag. And this was one of the concepts for the wow experience. So it's more about the excitement of drinking, the sensorial experience. So this is what I would call my older work. And the reason why I showed it is to kind of also show the transition that I made as a design researcher myself. Because one of the things that I really learned from all of that work is that in the end, if you want to design for a particular emotion, what you need to know is what are the underlying needs that you are addressing. So the emotion is just the entry point. It's like the gateway to understanding what it is that drives people. Like the wheelchair example, through measuring the emotion of shame, we discovered that the autonomy, which is a fundamental need, was harmed by the existing wheelchairs. So now that's what I'm focusing on. How can we use emotions as a tool, as a means to design stuff that people really resonate with? And the nice thing is that these needs are actually also the fundament of joy. So while learning about these needs, you also learn about what makes us enjoy life. And before I go into that, I have a question for you. You don't have to answer it, but you can keep the answer in mind. And the question is, what activity gives you joy? Can be anything. Like, I love to travel, or I love to have dinner with my friends, or I love to clean my house. Anything that gives you a sense of joy. And you can keep that in mind when I talk about these fundamental needs. So here's one example. This guy is called Gregory Patrick, and he's from Orlando. And he's a carpenter. And what he loves to do, what gives him joy, is to knit teddy bears to raise money for homeless people. And I'm guessing not everyone had the same activity in mind when I ask you what gives you joy. Maybe some, probably none. And this kind of shows, of course, the kind of the challenge that you're facing as designers, which is that there's an infinite diversity in activities and interactions that can provide us with joy. Knitting, climbing rocks, hunting. Some people love to hunt, puzzling. So, there are as many things that can give us joy as there are humans on this planet Earth. And yet, and I think that's where it becomes interesting for design, you could say that it boils down to a limited set of sources of joy. And this limited set, that's what I call the fundamental needs. So what are fundamental needs? They are inborn requirements for a living being's survival, effective functioning, well-being, and flourishing. So everything that is alive has needs. Plants have needs, animals have needs, humans have needs. And for humans, they play a central role in our emotion, in our joy, but also negative emotion. And this comes from the knowledge domain of humanistic psychology. So then the next question, of course, is, what is it that humans need? Of course, we have physiological needs, like the need for hydration, the need for sleep, air, food. But we have more. We also have psychological needs. And these psychological needs are just as fundamental as our physiological needs. And in fact, you need to fulfill them in order to survive and to flourish as a person. The last couple of decades, a lot of research has been done in humanistic psychology to try to understand what are our fundamental psychological needs. And maybe some of you know about Maslow. He was one of the first. He's actually one of the founders of humanistic psychology to create a typology or a catalog of human needs, you could say. But over the last couple of decades, more of these typologies have been introduced. Some of them are quite extensive. Some of them are really short. The famous one is self-determination theory. It only has 3 fundamental needs. And what I did together with a colleague is we examined all of that literature, and we also looked at what is actually the definition of universality. And from that, we distilled a list of what we would call the 13 fundamental psychological needs. And what we try to do is we try to balance conciseness, so it's not too extensive, so you can get an overview, with granularity. So you also want to make sure that there's a lot of diversity in there, because that's what designers need. We need to have that diversity because it's a palette of design opportunities. Actually, I see some of you making pictures. We also have a handout. So maybe, I don't know if you can hand out the handout. So with all the 13 fundamental needs, and I'm gonna walk through them one by one, and I'll be quick, so fasten your seatbelts. Here come the 13 fundamental needs. First one is autonomy, and we already saw that with the wheelchair for children. Being free to make your own choices in life and doing things your own way. Having the freedom to express yourself, to express your identity, be the person you wanna be, is a fundamental need. Also, beauty. Seeing elegance, coherence, and harmony in your surroundings and in the world. Again, something quite, I would say, relevant for designers. Comfort, having an easy, simple, and relaxing life. It doesn't mean we always have to feel comfortable, but if you never in your life feel comfort, if there's always tension, it's very difficult to flourish. So there needs to be moments of comfort. Community, very social need, being part of a group, being accepted by a group, an entity that is important to you. So we are a community. We are a community of people interested in design and emotion. There are all kinds of communities. You could say families are communities, academic communities. You can see it at sports games, right? These people are completely different, but what they share is that they're part of that community cheering for a sports team. Competence, feeling competent and having the skills to master challenges. We all need to kind of have this sense of I can do something, and it can be in your professional life, but it can also be in your private life. I know how to plan things. I know how to organize. I know how to raise my children well. We need to have some sense of competence in order to flourish. Fitness, having and using a body that is strong, healthy, and full of energy. Impact, seeing that your actions and idea have an impact on the world and contribute to something. We really need to have a sense of contribution. And in this case, this guy is building a house. It's quite literal, but it can also be having an impact through the ideas that you share. Like what I like to believe I'm doing right now. I'm having an impact on your thinking through the ideas. Morality, seeing the world as a moral place and being able to act in line with your values. Having a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning and direction in life. This can be spiritual, it can be religious, but it can also have other forms. You need to have the feeling that I can give meaning to my life. If you feel that life is meaningless and purposeless, it's very difficult to flourish as a human being. Recognition, being seen by other people, getting appreciation for what you do and respect for who you are. And related to that, relatedness, having warm, mutual, trusting relationships with people you care about. So whereas community is about being part of a group, relatedness is really about one-to-one relationships. Is there someone who loves me? There's someone I can love. And it can be, it can be romantic love, but it can be friendship. It can also be a relationship with a pet even. Security, feeling that your conditions and environment keeps you safe from harm and threats. Can be quite literal, but also here, things like financial security, social security. Very important for us to flourish. And finally, that's the last one, stimulation, being mentally and physically stimulated by pleasurable impulses and stimuli. Like comfort, you don't need to be stimulated all the time, but if there's never any stimulation in your life, it's very difficult to flourish. So now we can go back to the question, what activity gives you joy? And my invitation to you is, can you think about what need kind of is represented or fulfilled by that activity? And we don't really have time to go into that, but my expectation and actually prediction is that at least one of these 30 needs, and here they are again, is fulfilled by the activity that gives you joy, probably even more than one. And this is the beauty, right? So the activities are highly diverse, but we also share this kind of essentially kind of need fulfillment property as human beings. So there are a couple of things that inspire me as a design researcher when you look at these fundamental needs. First of all, is that they are universal. And I think it's actually mind-boggling. I mean, every human being is different. Even identical twins, they have different fingerprints. So no one is the same. And yet we are all the same. And I always tell my design students, it's very important to have the ability as a designer to navigate in that space. On the one hand, you could say we all share the same properties. On the other hand, you could say we are all different. And as designer, you're constantly navigating. And you should always be aware that we are all different, but you can also make use of those things that we share. It doesn't matter where you are born and what part of the world, it doesn't matter how old you are, we all have these fundamental needs. Of course, how we fulfill them strongly differs between people. You know, how you fulfill the need for relatedness, yeah, that different, you know, for a little boy, it's different than for someone who is an adult. So that's highly diversified. But the fact that we have this need for relatedness is something we share. Second insight that inspires me is that all needs need fulfillment. And Reki Dian, one of the most famous humanist psychologists, he said they're like vitamins. And I really like that kind of comparison. So you cannot cheat that system. You cannot say, you know what? I have so much autonomy. I don't have to care about anyone. I don't need any relatedness. Doesn't work like that. Everyone needs also relatedness in order to flourish. That can sound a bit stressful. It sounds like, okay, like I have to keep a lot of plates up in the air all the time, like 13 fundamental needs. But this is not the image you should be thinking of. It's more like this. It's, you know, you could see them as a collection of plants, and they all need attention to survive, but you don't need to constantly water them or constantly pay attention to them. Same to our needs. Same applies to our needs. So you don't need to fulfill them all of them at all moments in your life. And you can actually compensate. So if you have no autonomy in your working life, you can compensate for that by having like a hobby in your private life. It gives you a lot of autonomy. So, but all of these needs need to be fulfilled somewhere, somehow in your life, but not all at the same time. And another reason why it's not as stressful as it sounds, it's because we are hugely good. We're highly trained in what I would call stacking need fulfillment. I mean, this is not something that we do consciously. We're not waking up in the morning and thinking, okay, what are my fundamental needs and how am I going to fulfill it? But you could see us as kind of need fulfilling machines. So from the day we were born, we are constantly kind of trained to engage in those activities that give us positive emotions. And why do they give us positive emotions? It's because they fulfill our needs. And we create these complex social, cultural structures for need fulfillment. Here's just a simple example. You know, when you have a dinner with your friends, that fulfills multiple needs. I mean, it's about a sense of community, there's comfort, there's stimulation, there's relatedness, and maybe even more. And the fourth and final insight, and this is maybe the most relevant for design, is that yes, we are really good in stacking needs, but at the same time, that's not a perfect system. So it can also create all kinds of tensions, need dilemmas. And this girl, I mean, she's fulfilling her need for comfort, eating a pizza, but she might at the same time also feel a little bit regret because she knows it's not very healthy for her. So it's harming her need for fitness. And you can recognize these dilemmas by, when you're being torn between two choices of actions. Okay, I want to work on this project, but I also want to, go outside and enjoy the beautiful day. And it often comes with mixed emotions, some joy, but also maybe a little bit of regret or shame. And these dilemmas are very valuable as entry points for design. And I have an example of that. So, 3 design opportunities. I'm not a psychologist, I am a design researcher, but I'm heavily inspired by what's happening in psychology. And I try to translate that to design opportunities. And I think there are many, but I'll just give 3. The first one is just to use it as a source of inspiration. I mean, my design students, they always believe, oh, I have to do a lot of research to make use of this. No, not really. I mean, you can just use it and let your mind work. Use it as the palette of needs as a creative stimulator. And I'll show an example to illustrate what I mean. Like if you would design a chair, for example, and you can ask yourself, what would a chair look like if it fulfills the need for, and you can pick a random need in your design process. So what would a chair look like that fulfills the need for security? Well, it could look something like this. This is called the hush pot. It's made out of felt and you can wrap it around you, create a safe space for yourself. What would a chair look like that fulfills the need for fitness? Well, there are many chairs who do that, like this one, Baloo, and it forces you to have an active seating posture. What about relatedness? Well, the hug chair was designed in such a way that it creates this intimate tete-a-tete space for 2 people. What about competence? Well, maybe something like this. This is called the chairless chair. And you can attach it to your body so you can walk and sit. And I actually could use that a lot when I'm teaching. What about autonomy? This chair is called the body morphing chair. It's a cushion filled with rice. You can shape it any way you like it. So there's a lot of freedom in how you want to sit or how you want to use this. Community, the woven rocker chair. So it's more of an art installation than a real chair, but it's put in the street and people in the street can just sit there. And because it's made out of fabric, you can feel the movement of everyone inside. So it really generates this intimate sense of community. Morality, the RD4 chair, which is completely made out of waste material. Or comfort, the sway rocking chair, which is designed in such a way that you cannot really sit straight up. So you're forced to relax and you can read a little bit or take a nap. So it's really designed with this sense of comfort. So, and these were just some random examples to illustrate how I believe that having typologies like this fundamental need can really be a source of inspiration in itself. This is what the Rubin Museum of Art did in New York. They asked themselves, what would a museum look like if it fulfills the need for purpose? Right? So they used this and they specifically focused on spirituality. So what they did is people could have a dream over. So in the places where there are spiritual works of art, people could actually sleep there. And when they woke up in the morning, so that art could influence their dreams at night. And when they woke up, they could have an intimate personal conversation with the work of art. And I thought that was a really nice example of something which is not very custom to do for a museum. We're really focusing on how can we fulfill that particular need. And here's an example of one of my students. So what would a shin guard look like that fulfills the need for community? So here you can see a shin guard is used when playing soccer or football. And her target group was actually children who have leg prosthesis. And it's interesting because you could say they don't really need shin guards, because the leg doesn't have a feeling. Well, they do because they can harm other children with the metal leg. And the student said, it's such a vulnerable situation to be in when you're playing sports because you have to wear shorts and it's this social thing and you can feel like the difference between yourself and the other children. So how can I design a shin guard in such a way that it alleviates that? So she really created shapes and colors and designs that are associated with playing sports. And here you can see her prototype, and this is how it's used. So it focuses on the interaction of putting on a shin guard so that you share with the other children who do not have a leg prosthesis. So together you put on your shin guard, so you'll become part of that activity. And it really has this aesthetics and meaning of a sportive kind of equipment. So I thought it was nice because it's a functional object, but she really designed it with the focus on sense of community. Second design opportunity, find the need that is harmed. In every situation, even in this situation, we're here because it fulfills some of our needs, but the situation always creates tension with other fields. So if you find a need that is harmed and focus on that as a designer, you know you will be emotionally relevant. And I have another student example, and it's a very interesting example because it was a huge challenge for the design student, Job Jansweijer. His design context was a pediatric oncology center. So this is the place where children go to for cancer treatments. And as part of the cancer treatment, they often have to go into isolation to avoid the risk of contamination. And this can last for 4 days, up to even sometimes 4 months. So there's literally a glass wall between them and the rest of the world. And people can only enter their space when they're wearing protective suits. So you can understand that this is quite an intense situation to be in. So Job studied what are the key needs that are harmed in this situation. And he found that the need for relatedness. It's kind of obvious. I mean, there's a glass wall between you and the rest of the world. But he saw that these children, there's so much opportunity for them to play, and they can go online and have interactive online games. But the actual physical presence of another person playing with them, that's what they were missing. That was what giving this sense of relatedness, the physical togetherness of play. And he focused on that for his design. And we have a little movie clip in which he explains his own design.
Eugène Breinaert is 87. Hij heeft een auto en een garage. Alleen de combinatie van die twee is een beetje krap.
For my graduation project at the TU Delft, I developed a game which allows isolated children in child hospitals to play with their peers. It's called Connect, and it's a game they can play on the windows between their rooms and the hallways. By combining the ambiguous shapes in different ways, you can play different kinds of games. So you can play existing games like tic-tac-toe, but you can also build your own fantasy world. To test Connect, I place it at the oncology department of a Dutch child hospital, and this is what happened.
Ja.
Yeah, so in terms of technology, I mean, it's not very innovative at all. It's just a couple of shapes, some magnets, some suction cups. But what I really loved about his design is the simplicity of it. So he now has a company, and this is produced and used across in hospitals across the world. But what I really love is how he took what is the problem, which is the glass wall, and turned it into part of the solution. So he transformed his social barrier into a playscape. And I thought I also had to kind of put at least one example of my own work in it. So this is one of my own designs, not this one. Oh, by the way, if you're curious about Eugene, the other movie, I will show that later in the lecture. So don't worry, we'll get to Eugene later. So I was commissioned by an airline company to look at the emotional impact of the meals that they serve on board of the airplane. And we're talking about economy class long-haul flights. And as you can imagine, these do not typically evoke a lot of positive emotions. They're not a fountain of joy. This is an example of a breakfast. So they knew this, and they had worked with famous chefs to try to improve the recipe. And the consequence was that it became more expensive, but the emotion was still negative. And the reason is that, it is mass produced in a huge kitchen, then it's stored and it's heated in a lot of little ovens. So the quality will never be really high. So what we did is we measured again the emotions that people experience when they are on board of the airplane. And we found a couple of positive and a couple of negative. And the most prominent negative emotions were, as you can imagine, frustration and boredom. And these had to do with the need for autonomy. So people get frustrated because there is very little autonomy in an airplane. I mean, you're literally stuck to a chair. And boredom has to do, of course, with the need for stimulation. I mean, you've read a book, maybe you've watched a movie. At some point, you start to get bored. So we said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take these needs as the starting point for the redesign of the breakfast. And the airline company said, what are you doing? I mean, these emotions have no relation to the breakfast. This is about the flight. So why are you not focusing on the breakfast? And then I said, well, that's true, but we do know that in the context of eating that breakfast, these needs are harmed. So people are very sensitive to these needs. So if we can do something in the breakfast to alleviate that or to fulfill those needs, we know that we will be emotionally relevant. So we started sketching, and with these two needs in mind, and this is the end result. So as you can see, it consists of multiple components. On the left side, there are warm elements. On the right, there are cold elements. And in the middle, there are called elements that are called condiments, so nuts and honey. And then there's a herbal tea and a coffee. And when you open it, it explains that you can combine all of these elements in many different ways. So you can play with your food. It gives you a sense of stimulation, and it gives you some autonomy because, it's really up to you how you want to do this, how you want to consume your own breakfast. And it did have an emotional impact. So the positive emotions were much stronger and the negative emotions much lower. And it even did have an impact on the overall flight experience when it was introduced. What I love about this example is that it really illustrates that from a design point of view, it can pay off very much to sometimes take a step back from what you're designing and look at the context in which this is used. Because design is always used in the context of an activity and what happens in that activity. And you can make use of that in your design. And then there's the third, final design opportunity, and that's focusing on dilemmas. And I already mentioned it. I believe that need dilemmas, they're like what I call the golden nugget for design, because if you find a dilemma, you can do something with that, you know that people will really love it. And actually, it also forces you to be innovative. Here's again an example from one of my students. And her task was to design something that enables and stimulates children with physical impairment, visually impaired children, to sports, to be physically active. I mean, all people need to be physically active to be healthy, also children who are blind. And from a functional point of view, that was not a relevant question because there are solutions. And they're like home trainers for children. I mean, you can put a child on a home trainer and then they are physically active. And that really prioritizes the need for safety because nothing can go wrong. I mean, if it falls off, no harm is done. But the problem is that it's extremely boring. I mean, even for me, it's boring to be on a home trainer. Can you imagine for a child? So the student, what she kind of explored is what then are the fundamental needs that are fulfilled when people are intrinsically motivated to be physically active. And she said that it's all about competence because what children do when they're really having fun is they test their own boundaries. They see how far can I go until I fall or until I trip. And that's where the fun comes. It's the excitement, exhilaration of taking risks. And there are no risks in the existing solutions whatsoever. And the interesting thing is, so if you visualize it like this, yeah, what you're going to do. I mean, it's either about the risks or it's about safety. You have no alternative. But the interesting thing is that there is actually no fundamental conflict between these needs. You can also visualize it like this. And if you do, you can immediately see that there is a solution space, right? So here's your solution space. Design something that fulfills both needs. And that's what she did. So she said, I'm going to design something that explores, that enables children to explore and expand their boundaries in a safe and fun way. This is in the end the design. So it's called Link. As you can see, it's a big ball. There's an outer shell, which is hard, and then there's the inner ball, which is made of a net, so it's soft. And when children are inside, they can determine how fast they want to go or what they want to do. And some children were really cautious when we were testing this, but some are really running around, like this little boy. And, what can happen? You can trip, you can, fall, but no harm is done. And you can imagine how exciting this is for children if you can see, let alone if you do not see, if it's just the physical sensation of it. And this was years ago, but what I will never forget is like one of the parents who was there, she started to cry. And I asked, why are you crying? And she said, I've never seen my own son so excited about running around. And I thought that was really beautiful. So to summarize, I really believe that fundamental needs are a very interesting and profound source of design inspiration. You can use it just as a source of inspiration. You can try to understand what are the needs that are harmed and see how can we fulfill those. And you can look at what are the dilemmas that people have in relation to their activities, in relation to existing products, and work with that. So I mentioned that, one of the transitions that I made as a researcher myself is that I started really like on a quantitative approach, like measuring emotions and quantifying that. And then it became more and more qualitative, looking at more the psychology, humanistic psychology, the needs. And then a new transition that I made is that I really try to understand how it all connects to our happiness. Like, what is the relation between emotion and happiness? And should we be designing for emotion, or should we, in fact, be designing for human happiness? And one of the things that really inspired me was the story of Eugene. And he became a celebrity because he was on Belgian television and actually comes from the same place where I was born. And now we can watch the movie of Eugene Breinart.
Eugène Breinaert is 87. Hij heeft een auto en een garage. Alleen de combinatie van die twee is een beetje krap.
Mijn auto die is 1,49 meter. Mijn garage daar is 1,55 meter. Dat doet hem 6 centimeter.
Eugène Breinaert is 87.
Oczywiście to wszystko jest zaplanowane. Teraz Państwo mogą przygotować pytania.
Of course, all that is planned because you can prepare questions now, because very soon we will have the end of the lecture, so concentrate on your thoughts and I will be back with the image in a moment.
I have a question to you.
Oh, yeah.
Because when you were talking about those 13 basic fundamental psychological needs, I'm curious if there is one or two that are more popular. Did you research it?
Well, I didn't study that myself, but I do know that there are researchers who are focusing on that. And what they, oh, wow. What they say is that you can see that when you go through transitions, some needs kind of emerge or become more prevalent. It's like when you're moving to a different town, all the structures that you had for certain need fulfillment, they kind of disappear. So you have to redevelop that. So when a particular need is no longer fulfilled, then it becomes awake. And you can see that in the individual level, but you can sometimes also see it on the kind of more on the social, cultural level. I mean, quite a disturbing example would be if a country is at war, there's a shared sense of lack of need for safety, right? So you can see these things, but it's not the case that some needs are more important than others. I mean, as a human being, we can value some of them more. You can say, you know, I really value my autonomy, but it doesn't mean that that need is actually more important. So, yeah.
We are ready to.
All right.
Eugène Breinaert is 87. Hij heeft een auto en een garage. Alleen de combinatie van die twee is een beetje krap.
Mijn auto die is 1,49 meter. Mijn garage daar is 1,55 meter. Dat doet hem 6 centimeter, zie. En door heb ik dan de moes aangedaan. Tegen dat ik moest tegenrijden. Dat doet, dat ben ik kwijt tegen die moes. Moet tegen de moes mag ik tegenrijden, dat mag geen schroeven, niet. We gaan nog binnenrijden, niet.
Eugène moet zowat de handigste chauffeur van Vlaanderen zijn. Het is letterlijk rijden tot op de millimeter. En zelfs als de auto binnen staat, moet hij er nog altijd uit geraken.
Voilà, doe ik mijn deurken open, zeg. En dan moet ik mijn deurken van mijn auto open doen, want anders kan ik niet uitstappen, niet. Voilà, en zie dat ik een blusje maak. Auto kan stilleggen, uitstappen, de wagen vooruit duwen, dat de deur van de auto toe kan, hè. Want anders kan ik de deur van de keuken niet toe doen. Voilà, de deur van de auto is toe, naar deze deur toe doen. En de zeteltjes daarvoor zitten.
So he became a celebrity, and then there was a crowdfunding to kind of finance a bigger garage for him. And he said, you know what? I don't need the money. I'm perfectly happy with the current situation. And that really made me think, you know, because I work at a design engineering school and we really focus always on the problem. First step in any design process is what's the problem and how can we solve this? Well, I can see a lot of problems here that can be solved, but will it make him happier? He actually says no. So what is it that makes us happy? And that's an interesting question. And Libermersky and her colleagues, they studied what factors determine the difference in the levels of happiness between people. And they found that there are 3 main factors that explain why one person is more different than another. First factor explains 10% of the differences, so kind of modest. And that's our circumstances. So, like what kind of garage you have, or if you have a garage at all, or if you have a car at all. If you have a job, if you like your job, if you have a family, the material context you live in, even if you're healthy, all of that is circumstances. And all of that only explains 10% of the differences between how happy we are. At least if your fundamental needs are fulfilled to some degree, of course. The second factor is what they call the genetic set point. It's our genes, it's what we are born with. It's your talent to be happy. And that's interesting. Some people have musical talent. We all can learn how to play the violin, but some people learn it much quicker than others. Same for happiness. Some people, they are blessed because they have the talent to be happy more than others. And the third and final factor is what we do. What is it that you do? What are your activities? And as you can see, our activities play a much bigger role in determining how happy we are than our circumstances. And from this comes the famous activity recommendation. If you want to increase your happiness, don't buy new products, but invest in activities. And this comes from positive psychology, and they're really good in bashing everything that I do, which is design. They say design doesn't matter, it's about activities. And they always use these very extreme examples. They say, yeah, you know, there was this father and his relationship with his son was not very good, so he bought a bigger TV, hoping that it would improve his relationship, and of course it didn't. But I think, you know, they're incorrect, because indeed, you could say that circumstances do not matter, you know, if you use examples like that, bigger TV sets. But, you know, when I look at design, this is what I see. I see a guy playing a guitar. The guitar is a product, but it's all about the activity. So it's not about what we own, but what we do. And design is a platform for activities. Hence, I would say design can contribute in a meaningful way to our well-being. So the Kookaboo bike is a bike which is made completely out of bamboo. It's a really nice initiative. And one of our students had to redesign the packaging of that bike. And in the end, what she did is she designed it in such a way that it actually comes like a self-make, you have to make it yourself. So it's like an IKEA package. So it is designed in such a way that the children, together with their caretakers, can build a bike. And can you imagine how cool that is? You build your own bike together with your father or your mother. And that really contributes to the meaning of that product and the well-being that you derive from it, the activity of building it. So this is what I call positive design. And I think it's a really nice and emerging field in design research. It's an umbrella term for all forms of design, design research, and design intentions, in which explicit attention is paid to the effects of design on subjective well-being of individuals and communities. And there's a lot of research to be done, but I do believe that it fulfills a real need of our students. When I was a design student, I went to university because I wanted to create cool stuff. I just wanted to make nice products. When I talk to students nowadays, they're much more critical. They're much more aware of the impact that they have. And they say, I really want to develop the skill to do something which is meaningful in the world rather than just design cool stuff. And we need the knowledge that we can teach them to do that. So one of the things is we created this framework, which represents 3 lenses that you can kind of incorporate when you're designing for happiness. And I have a little movie for that too. It's a third and final movie.
When you're designing, whether it's a product, a service, an interior, or a system, you have many tools and methods that can help you in making it safe, attractive, and effective. But how do you make it meaningful? What is it that makes people happy? You will get as many answers as people you ask. So yes, it is very personal. And yet, we identified a number of underlying universal principles. Let's take a car as an example. First, it can provide you with pleasure. Imagine the delightful experience of the wind in your hair while driving your convertible. Second, it can support your sense of personal significance. Your trusted car can give you the freedom to pursue your life goals, like being a surf hero. And third, it can enable you to be virtuous, like when you find yourself helping someone who could use a hand. Did you notice? It is not really about the car, but about how it supports pleasurable and meaningful experiences. Pleasure, personal significance, and virtue are 3 basic ingredients that you can use in your design projects. And when combined, you will hit the happiness sweet spot.
Yeah, so this is the framework that we use with our students. So can you design, when you're designing, can you ensure that it evokes pleasure, but it also contributes to personal significance, and it also enables people to engage in virtuous interactions. And have like less than a minute left, but I have an example for each 3 of them, and I'll go really quick. So this is Design for Pleasure. So this is a shield that is used for children in schools who have difficulties with focusing. So when they put the shield, they kind of use that to take away external stimuli. And yeah, it works, but it also has this really negative, unpleasant social kind of meaning. You know, this black screen between you and the rest of the world. So the designer recreated it into what they call a forest. And rather than it being unpleasant, it's pleasurable because you can create your forest together and it's a social thing and it's enjoyable. An example for design for personal significance. So this is what you typically see in the kitchen. It's quite dangerous. So you don't want toddlers to play with that, of course. But how can you enable toddlers to work with you in the kitchen on cooking food? So Lotte Jacobsen created kitchen tools for toddlers. And it's fun, so it's enjoyable, but it also enables them to really develop their skills because it really works with what toddlers are able to do physically. Their strength, you can see, you know, from forbidden, it's forbidden to be in the kitchen and to help, to you can make a meaningful contribution. So it really creates a sense of significance for these children. And the final example, it's about virtue. This was Simon Akaya, and he wanted to design for altruism, which is a virtue. So I'm going really fast. Apologies for that. And he focused on a garbage bag. And what he created is this. It's called a goedzak in Dutch, which means a good bag. And it's something which you can use to put stuff in, which actually other people might still want to use. And if you don't have the ability to bring it to the recycle center, you can use the good bag. And it's clearly distinguishable from a normal garbage bag. And it alerts people, hey, you can take stuff out of this. And what I really loved about this is that one of the biggest retail companies in the Netherlands, supermarket, for when it was Christmas, they created a version of it together with the designer, with which children could bring toys that they no longer use to the supermarket. And then they would distribute it to children who cannot afford new tools. I love the irony from a shopping bag into a giving bag. So virtue, pleasure, and purpose, I think, if you're able in your activities, whether it's design or not, to combine all of that, then you hit the sweet spot of design for well-being. That's the end of my lecture. I have one little story to share still. It's a personal story, and I really, it's something that I always go back to because it inspires me. You remember I started with the wheelchair example. And I always show this also to first-year bachelor students. And the prototype is in our building on display. And a couple of years ago, one of the students, his name is Bart, and he's in the picture, he's in the middle on the top. He approached me after the lecture. And he's in a wheelchair himself. And I said, yeah, I really like that wheelchair. I thought it was such a nice example. But you have to know, I already knew about that wheelchair before I saw your lecture. And then I said, oh yeah, of course, you've seen the prototype in the building, right? He said, no, I already knew about it before I came to Delft to be a student. So I said, okay, you need to explain this to me. And he said, well, Eva Dijkhuis, the student who designed that wheelchair, when she created the prototype, she went to a school to test it. And in that school, the teacher announced it to the children. She said, this afternoon there's going to be a lady, and she created a new wheelchair design and she wants to test it with you. And he was one of those children. And he was so inspired by the fact that that woman in his eyes, of course, really designed a wheelchair, that at that moment he thought, I want to become a designer too. So now he's in Delft studying design. And I think it's a beautiful example of, there's always these ripple effects that we cannot anticipate upon. But it's beautiful to think that what we do as designers, as design teachers, can have those kind of positive ripple effects. Thank you very much.
Bardzo dziękujemy.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Are you able to hear me? Hello, hello. So we are very grateful, thank you. Certainly, learning about those 3 fundamental psychological needs is a response to the 14th need, that is to understand and to understand those needs. Does anyone have any questions in the room?
Whatever. Okay. I wanted to ask you if you can share some more experience regarding user research. Like you had this one example with the plane where you said that you observed people, and on the pictures that was clearly visible what emotions they had. But do you have some experience also with really guiding the user research, like UX tests and how to talk with people, how to ask questions. Like, I also know that most of us don't really know all the names of emotions which we feel.
Yeah.
And sometimes we are also not aware of something what we feel. So how to learn it for the basis of design?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is weird. It's difficult to give a short answer to that, but I showed in the beginning, I showed these characters, these cartoons, and I believe that that is actually quite a powerful tool, because when you're engaging with a person in user research and you ask, what is it that you feel? People find it very difficult. In fact, you usually say, I don't feel anything. I mean, I don't have any emotions towards this product. I have emotions to my children, not to an airplane meal. So the thing is that the emotions that we have when we are interacting with products are what we call micro emotions, the tiny emotions, and it's more difficult to get to that. And there's a lot of techniques out there that commercial parties who claim that they can measure that through physiological measurement, but I don't really believe in that, because there's a lot of claims, but it's not substantiated with scientific evidence that these measurements are reliable. So I still rely on just asking people. And then when you use these characters, it gives like an intuitive language, I would say. It's much easier to pinpoint something than to have to find the word yourself. Also, it enables you to talk about, it kind of helps you to externalize your feelings and to have a conversation about that character. So while you're actually talking about yourself, it's less kind of threatening because you're talking about the character. So you say, oh yeah, I really feel like this. Yeah, and then I ask, so what does it express? Yeah, it expresses a little bit of irritation. So we use that, and you can use it in a qualitative way, like having that on the table as the basis for a conversation. You can also use it in a quantifiable way, where you put it in a questionnaire with Likert scales or things like that. So there are many possibilities. But yeah, usually we just use this kind of list or typology of emotions as a means. And the real value and the meaning comes then from the conversation about it, because that's when you find out what drives those emotions. I did write a couple of papers on how to do this. So if you're interested, you can always send me an email and I can share the papers in which we actually share also the techniques that we use.
Czy jeszcze pojawia się pytanie tutaj?
Any more questions? I think we're running out of time slowly, so I think we'll stop at the second question. I am going to ask in Polish, it'll be easier to explain. My question is about the short video you showed about Eugene, this gentleman with the car. So he said he's happy in that situation, in those circumstances. He doesn't want change. He doesn't want a new garage. But I wonder to what extent people don't like adapting to change, to new things. And they say they're happy the way things are. But that's maybe not entirely true. Maybe they simply don't realize they might be happier with a different garage or a different product. And to what extent should we also take that factor into account? Even if somebody says they're happy in a given situation, maybe they're just trying to avoid change. Should we leave that person alone or pay attention to that?
Right. And, a very clear example is remote control. Do I need a remote control? No, but once I have one, I cannot live without it anymore. There's this famous movie clip made by a journalist about mobile phones. When it was new to the market, they were interviewing people in the street. Do you need a mobile phone? Why would I need a mobile phone? People would call me. I don't want people to call me. And so it's really funny to see that, because now we cannot live without it anymore. So you're absolutely right. So, but the point that I wanted to make is that, especially in our design school, we really focus always on what are the problems, and we automatically assume that the problems that we identify, if we solve them, we're doing something meaningful. And I think it's important to always kind of be more critical about that. And so I would say, it's about the nuances in the middle. So yes, indeed, sometimes people just cannot imagine how much better their life would be, and they just resist to change. But on the other hand, we as designers should also be careful in just assuming that when we see something which we think a problem, that we should address it. So it's, I think, an interesting dialogue to have with yourself and also with the design team and with the people you're designing for. It's a good point.
I ostatnie pytanie.
And the last question.
W związku z tym,
Okay, I think we've got 2 questions and 2 mics, so let's just take the last question now.
Or needs, in your opinion, don't get enough attention from designers nowadays? And also, what are the biggest challenges for design in designing for them?
Yeah. So I always get really irritated when we're talking about, in design, we're talking about emotions as if it's something which has to do with the aesthetics. And of course, aesthetics have an impact on emotion, but emotion is about much more than that. So, famous designers say, oh, it's all about emotions. It's all about the looks. You see that a lot of in the automotive industry. And I think they're really misrepresenting the profoundness of human emotions and how anything that the design does to you in a functional way, but also in a more kind of identity type of way, like the wheelchair, is designed for emotion. So I really see emotion as almost an essential part of what you're designing for. And I also see that there's a lot of knowledge that can be used for that. I mean, all the theories that I showed, it's knowledge which is out there. There's a whole field of emotion psychology. There's so much knowledge we can use. And design researchers tend to never really read that much. I mean, they always come up with their own, and I'm one of them, with their own theories. So that's also something that frustrates me a little bit. Like, there is a lot of knowledge out there. Why don't we build upon that rather than always trying to reinvent the wheel? One of the main challenges I see is that, of course, what are we going to do with artificial intelligence in relation to the emotional impact of design? I mean, the products that I showed, that's really old school, right? It's physical stuff. The reality of design is that we're now moving into a more collaborative space between a co-emerging space of design and people. And it's so much more complex. How that can be understood from an emotional point of view, that's still really an open question for me. So that's a real challenge. And another key challenge is how they're going to measure, how we're going to predict the impact. I mean, it's easy once you have a working prototype to measure, but then a lot of complex design challenges, more system design, you cannot really prototype. You cannot prototype a hospital to see how people will respond to it. How can we ensure that it will evoke the right experiences if we're not able to prototype and test it? So these are at least 2 key challenges I see in our research domain.
bardzo dziękujemy. I ostatnie pytanie.
Quick. Thank you very much for great presentation. I am filled with positive emotions after that, and all these examples were perfect.
Thank you.
But my question is a bit provocative. You showed how this positive design leads to happiness, and the world is more complex. You showed the paradise, but there is also the hell. There are wrong emotions, and there are marketing people and politicians, and which are using the bad emotions, which leads to some kind of happiness of some people. Okay, so my question is whether in your institute you analyze also these wrong emotions, which designers should avoid.
Yeah. So to be honest, I take like an agnostic scientific point of view. So I don't place value. I don't have a value judgment about what emotions we should design for, but I do try to give designers the tools to be conscious about it, to have the ability to analyze it, and then based on their own considerations and their own moral compass, make the decisions that they believe is morally right or ethical. I do see that, emotions and design for emotions is also abused, and especially in marketing context. I mean, using this kind of knowledge to try to stimulate people to believe that it will make them happy, but in fact it doesn't. And I also see that, of course, there's a lot of negative impact of design on the world, and all of that we have to be conscious of. I mean, even Victor Papenhuyzen already said it. It's one of the most destructive professions in the world is design. So I know and I'm aware of all of that, and that is an important context. But within that, what I try to do is to create tools that actually enable my design students to be conscious about it and make the decisions for themselves. Yeah. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękujemy, pan profesor Desmet.
Thank you very much, Professor Desmet.